Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll wait a few seconds for people to join. Okay. Today we will be discussing employee well-being and its impact on employee retention. My name is Kylie, and I'm the U.S. Outreach Marketing Specialist at Factorial HR. I'm so happy to be joined by three workplace culture experts, Alysha Campbell, Hannah Malvin, and Robyn Pollack. Today, before we get started, here's a bit about Factorial and our panelists. We are an all-in-one provider of software solutions for people teams. Our software features time and attendance tracking, applicant tracking, performance reviews, and more. We streamline HR processes, giving HR professionals more time to dedicate to what really matters, their employees. Their employees. This webinar is interactive and we encourage your participation. We will have our Q&A session following the discussion, so feel free to leave your questions in the chat at any time. So on to our panelists. We have Alysha, we have Robyn, and we have Hannah. So Alysha, if you want to get started and give us a little bit of an introduction about you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kylie, for having me, and thank you everyone for tuning in. As Kylie said, my name is Alysha M. Campbell. I am the founder and CEO of Culture Shift HR, which is an HR and diversity, equity, and inclusion consultancy firm helping organizations to put DEI back into their workplace culture. And I have over 10 years of experience within HR, and in 2018 started Culture Shift HR to really help support small and growing startups and organizations in creating more inclusive workplaces. I've been very blessed to be, nominated and awarded for multiple HR accolades, as well as being a best-selling author in addition to that. So super excited to be a part of this incredible panel of women and to contribute to this very important conversation.
Thanks so much, Alysha. And Robyn, on to you, if you can share a little bit about you.
Great. Thanks, Kylie. I'm so honored to be here and to be here with these other wonderful women who are leaders in the space. My name is Robyn Pollack. I am a workplace culture strategist and founder at a company called Lutel. Lutel sits where employment law meets workplace culture and DE&I. So we actually have a full service employment law firm that is married to a full service culture DEI consulting firm. So really able to look at culture issues, both from a risk mitigation and compliance perspective, as well as a people and culture perspective. In my prior life, I was a restructuring lawyer at a large firm in Philadelphia. So have brought all of my business, financial, legal, human capital knowledge, advising large companies into this work. I've been doing DEI work really my whole career and specifically focusing on this outside of practicing law since 2015. So really excited to be here to begin to bring some best practices to this group and really share with everybody the impact that we are having in changing culture through integrating DEI into the organizations that we work with.
Thanks so much, Robyn. And Hannah, if you can share a little bit about you as well.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Malvin, she, her pronouns. Really happy to be here today with everyone and getting to focus on workplace culture and employee well-being. I'm a coach and consultant focused on workplace culture rooted in equity and well-being. I'm certified in positive psychology, the scientific study of well-being, and I had been working in the equity and workplace culture space and really felt like that well-being, that joy was missing sometimes. So glad to bring that part to the conversation. I work with corporate foundations, federal agencies, nonprofits on a wide range of projects, from recruitment and retention of diverse talent to employee resource groups, staff retreats, technical advice, lots of different projects to get into building a culture that folks can be excited about. And I'm program manager for Greening Youth Foundation's the Bridge program, which is an equitable hiring pathway for the environmental sector focused on people of color. And I founded Pride Outside, which connects people of color around, or connects the LGBTQ community around the outdoors, and works with Congress, federal agencies, and conservation nonprofits on LGBTQ inclusion initiatives. So happy to be here.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. And I know it's going to be such an interesting conversation to hear all your perspectives and talk about some strategies related to employee well-being. So like I said, we will be discussing employee well-being and talk about how that can really impact employee retention. So this is a question for all of our panelists. If you can tell us in your own words why this is such an important conversation to have and its place in the workplace. Let's say, Robyn, if you want to get started.
Sure. So why is employee well-being important? I think employee well-being has always been important, but it's certainly at the forefront now. And I think that the pandemic has certainly been a catalyst for that. So many changes in the workplace, how people work, how they want to work, shifting priorities has really put this, at the top of the list of many organizations. I think employee well-being needs to be thought of a little bit more broadly, and I think maybe we're going to get into that a little bit as we talk, because to me, this is all about employee experience, which is so rooted in culture. So, we need to think about employee well-being as beyond just, are you taking a break? Are you, providing smoothies and yoga, at your workplace or for remote employees? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about employee experience and how people feel part of an organization, and belonging and trust and inclusion and psychological safety, all of those cultural elements. And so I think thinking about it more broadly is where we need to go. And of course, we see the great resignation and, quiet quitting and all the terms that are coming up that are really describing, what is it that people want and how are workplaces responsive to that as a mechanism to attract and, even more importantly, retain their talent. So this is just a great topic and really happy that we're focusing on it.
Thanks so much, Robyn. And Hannah, what about you? What do you want to add to that?
Yeah, building on what Robyn's saying, I think we'll get into the employee well-being is so much more than it's often thought of. But it matters because it's people's lives. It's where they spend so much of their time, and their lives matter. And we can be cultivating, what makes life worth living while we're at work. And it doesn't have to suck. It can be so much better with some intention, with some thought and some expertise. There's ways to build really good workplace cultures. So it's important for people's well-being. It's important for retention, and it'll show up in the business ledgers as well. But it's important for people's lives.
Thanks, Hannah. And Alysha?
Yes, building on both what Hannah and Robyn have shared, it really comes back to being able to be a whole human at work. I think the pandemic definitely sped up something that was already lingering in the background, from burnout to exhaustion to people, rage quitting. And so I think it's important that we understand now that our two worlds, from personal life to work life, have now collided. We need to figure out a way to bring our whole selves to both places and do it in a way that allows us to balance responsibilities of these both worlds as well. And so I think well-being is so critical in that, because it allows us to not just be present, but to be our best. And so well-being, understanding what that looks like to different individuals, understanding access to well-being supports and information is so critical. And the workplace can be such an incredible channel to make well-being a priority, while also factoring in workplace culture, productivity, and high engagement. So really all these things are colliding and coming into one. And I think it's really about time that it did that. And we really have a conversation about how we're going to optimize this for best practices, because this is really not only for today, but how we're going to be working and living in the future.
Thanks so much, Alysha. And I wanted to give our audience as well a chance to add what they think as well. If you want to add anything to this question that we just answered, and share your thoughts in the comments as we continue. And remember that this is interactive, so any questions that you have, anyone watching, feel free to send them anytime, and we'll get to those at the end of the panel discussion. So now that we've answered that, I would love to direct another question to Robyn. Okay, so Robyn, employee well-being and DEI should be top priorities in any organization, but the issue is they are often seen as two separate initiatives. So should these two priorities be viewed as complements of one another? And if so, how can DEI and employee well-being efforts be effectively woven together in the workplace?
There was a lot there. There's a lot there. I know Hannah and Alysha will have a lot to weigh in on as well. I think it goes back to what we've all been saying sort of in our opening remarks around, really looking at the fabric of an organization and the culture. And I think, again, looking at well-being as a broader construct and not sort of something that sits over here and is something that's part of culture. We look at DEI as culture. So even when we're advising companies around DEI, we don't compartmentalize DEI. DEI is something that gets woven through all elements of your culture, from all employee life cycle processes, from talent acquisition to development to leadership to succession planning. And I think the same is true for well-being. We need to look at everything in an integrated, comprehensive, holistic way to actually make it stick. It's interesting. Employees, I think, have more power now than ever. We see what's going on, and employees are driving a lot of what we're seeing finally, right? Because that's the power in making organizations turn to really do what they should have been doing all along. And now, you've got organizations that are like, oh, I've got to address this stuff, or my people are walking out the door and then I can't find people to replace them. And if I don't have people, I can't operate my business, let alone grow my business. So to Hannah's earlier point about looking at, bottom line, there's a financial impact to all of this, right? This is not about financial performance. It's about people, but you can't separate the two. So I think that all of this needs to be viewed holistically, and we need to think about how, as organizations, we are demonstrating our commitment, our support, and our investment in our people so that they, want to stay and have access and opportunity to grow. Well-being is certainly a huge part of that. Way, way, way back many years ago when I started my legal career, work-life, they called it work-life balance at the time. I always called it work-life integration, was the thing that everybody was talking about. How could you be a parent and have a job? How could you be a caregiver? How could you decide that you wanted to be in a book club and practice law? Like, those things were incongruent. And now we see that we have to step way outside of that and understand that, yes, people have responsibilities, but people also want to live their lives and they want to have joy and they want to be happy. And that leads to more productive, engaged employees, which, leads to financial performance. So it's all tied together. We cannot look at these things as silos. I'm interested in what my co-panelists have to say, because I'm sure they have thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely plus one to everything Robyn shared. I think what's so key is that element where I was kind of like jumping for joy inside, which is like employees have a lot of power. And we've seen that over the past 2 years with the turn of the pandemic, from remote working to hybrid working to having protests, not going back into the office, and really kind of stating what work can really look like for us for today's generations. And I think it's so key that we really take the opportunity that organizations need to listen to their employees first and foremost. We are the ones doing the work. We are the ones who are really at the forefront of facing customers, making sure the product or service is optimized and really creating and really contributing to that bottom line. So if we're able to be good enough to do the work and to have all those key insights and opportunities and values, we should also be able to stand and also share, this is what we're looking for as we come into workplace, whether it's DE&I and whether it's well-being related as well. And I think too, it's so key that we understand the intersectionality of well-being and diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can't feel included if I'm not my best self, if I'm not well, if I'm stressed out, if I don't feel like I have equal opportunity to be successful successful, if I don't feel like the practices of the organizations are equitable. So all those things go truly hand in hand. And to Robyn's point again, well-being is such a broad topic. Well-being can be health related, it can be physically related, mental health related as well. So well-being also takes on different definitions as every individual and employee also understands and takes on those characteristics and traits as well.
Yeah, and building on that last piece around really the intersections between equity and well-being, I think we want to be building the conditions at an organization so that everyone can thrive, and we don't want certain identities, if it's based on race or gender or ability, you don't want, pay inequities, or you don't want someone to be treated differently, or like they can't show up as their whole self, that they may not be comfortable sharing a certain identity that they hold that may not be visible, or maybe that their ideas aren't welcome, or that they have to represent their whole community if they are the only one, or if there aren't as many of them. You really, there are so many burdens that can be held by people from underrepresented communities that can impact their well-being at work. And so you really want to make sure you're looking across identities and making sure that well-being is available to everyone. And oftentimes inequities can get in the way of that.
Thank you so much. And it was interesting to hear all of your perspectives. So that's great. And going on to our next question for Alysha. Alysha, health equity is something that really shows the connection between those DEI efforts and employee well-being. Can you tell us more about that and share how organizations can maximize their health equity efforts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's interesting is that we don't talk about health equity enough in relation to the workplace. And I think when we think about health equity, our minds kind of go to like our healthcare systems, or, those, very traditional elements of well-being and kind of health services and practices. And so I think what's important when we now introduce the elements of health equity into the workplace, it really broadens what organizations are really trying to do from a DE&I perspective. Because if we even just, park the health element of that phrase, when we think of equity, it's having access and opportunity to a service or a program in the same way that I can engage with another element of my workplace experience as somebody else would. And so my experience doesn't make it my experience any less than somebody else's would. And so when we now introduce the element of health equity into that, it's are the ways that I'm getting access and opportunity to engage in well-being programs and different elements of social elements within the organization, and elements of connection and well-being, and then really defining what well-being means to me. Because when we think about well-being, as we kind of just shared, it can go in so many different facets. We could think about mental health, we could think about our physical health, we could think about how we got access to different benefit programs and different perks of that nature. So if I'm coming from an underrepresented group, how am I able to participate? How am I able to have access and opportunity to the same types of programs and ways that my other fellow colleagues do as well? And so that's where this intersectionality becomes so strong, because if we are creating programs and opportunities, but there's groups that are excluded or don't have opportunity to participate and have access, then we're automatically creating a barrier to the benefit of that perk. And so when we really then take that step back and think about health equity, it comes to how do we make sure we're creating a definition of health equity that aligns with our employees and our culture? And then two, what are the practices and protocols that allow that access to be as free flowing as possible? And so as we continue to have these conversations and focusing on well-being, we have to really think about that fuller spectrum of well-being, and then starting to think about, okay, how is this influencing our policies, our practices, maybe even our benefit providers, or what that element looks like in terms of how we bring well-being into the workplace and providing access to the most optimal level possible. And I think for a lot of employers or managers or people leaders right now who are hearing, this conversation, it's important that we start to think more importantly about that health equity piece and well-being, well-being, because these are the concerns that our employees have every single day. How am I going to continue to show up, not be burnt out, not be exhausted? How am I going to continue to be, the best for my team? So that key element of well-being needs to now expand and really look to see how we're creating a psychological safe culture, how we're creating opportunities of inclusion, how we're creating, a culture of trust that even allows me to talk to my manager to say, I need support right now. Can you help me? So it really begins to unlayer a lot of the deep constructs of what we mean by culture, and really starting to fix those deep rooted elements that maybe have gone unnoticed for way too long. And now are the time that we say, okay, this ends now. We need to now focus on creating and fixing these key elements so we can create a true culture of well-being.
Thanks so much, Alysha.
Yes.
And Hannah or Robyn, is there anything that you want to comment or add about what Alysha shared?
Yeah, I think that what Alysha's talking about, I think it's about the flexibility of an organization, that not every employee is the same or needs the same or requires the same to get to that level of equity, right? We think about, we talk about equity and equality, and equality is giving everybody the same so that you're rising at the same. Equity is giving a group that may be underrepresented or marginalized or needs something different, what they need to succeed to get to this point so that everybody can rise together. Because if you're doing this, you're perpetrating the barriers to that group. So I think the flexibility piece is really critical. Not everybody needs the same. So that when you're thinking about policies, programs, well-being, culture, you need to recognize that not everybody is starting at the same place, and that what each individual needs is not the same. I also like what Alysha's saying about trust. That is critical to all of this and overrides all of what we're talking about, to be able to build those trusted relationships at an organization, whether it's individual to individual, manager to their team, leadership, to the organization as a whole, so that people can feel safe to bring their authentic selves to work, can feel psychologically safe to ask questions, make mistakes, have the trust to be able to go and say, hey, I need to put the brakes on this, or I'm overwhelmed, or this is too much. And to be able to have those trusted relationships, to have those conversations, that is the key to all of this work, in my opinion. So I appreciate, Alysha, you bringing that up.
Thanks, Robyn. And Hannah, if there's anything you want to add, or we have the next question for you. So whatever you want to start with.
Yeah, we can keep moving.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so Hannah, with your experience as a coach and consultant on workplace culture rooted in equity and staff well-being, you see the importance and value in employee resource groups as a part of employee well-being strategy. So tell us about ERGs and their role in employee well-being. And then after, I have a little bit more of a question as well. So if you want to start with that.
I love ERGs. I think they're really a learning lab for workplace culture rooted in community-led efforts. And so it starts from that society is not set up for everyone to succeed, and organizations are not set up for everyone to succeed from all backgrounds. And so this is recognizing that within organizations, marginalized communities can benefit from access to one another, from community, from connection, from growth opportunities, from access to joy and fun together, from the chance to, if they want to, advance DEI initiatives within the organization. And I think that's a really important piece. I don't think that it's appropriate to outsource or to insource your DEI work to your ERGs and dump it on them and say that it's their job. I think if they are interested in that work, everything should be available to them, from resources and responsiveness and processes where they're able to put forward ideas. But oftentimes it becomes expectations wherein this should be about them, about supporting them and their well-being, as opposed to dumping work on them, and like unpaid work. So that brings in, you want to manage expectations. I think this might be what you're getting to next, Kylie.
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, the second part of the question was, how can companies get started with ERGs, and what are some things to keep in mind when building an effective ERG program?
Sure. So it's been really interesting. I've been working on a cool project around employee resource group management best practices and doing a literature review of what's out there, and interviewing a lot of ERG managers specifically in the federal government. And there's so much to draw from, and people come from all different backgrounds, and it's such a space where you can focus on all the different community-led ideas and ideas that have come up through their backgrounds and their culture and their history. And I think it's so exciting to pull from all those different strands and create space for that. I'd encourage folks to get clear on managing expectations sort of in both directions, from leadership and from the members of the groups and the leaders of the groups around what's the role of the ERGs at the organization, and to resource them, to give them money and opportunities and time to be able to build what they want, and to pay the leaders. That's been starting at LinkedIn and at Twitter, and I think recognizing the leadership that people are bringing is really important, and making that worth their while, and really working to match expectations between leadership and the ERG's members, so that they can understand what it's all about and what's going to be possible, to not burn out on either end or sort of waste goodwill.
Great. Thanks so much, Hannah. And moving, unless someone wants to add a little bit more to that, Alysha or Robyn, is there anything that you want to add on to what Hannah has said about employee resource groups?
I mean, I think +1 to everything Hannah said, what's so key is that I think they're not as utilized as they need to be in organizations when it comes to their DE&I strategy, and even, to the topic well-being. We need to be understanding that by creating these communities within our employees, this allows them to have that support system and to have other outlets of what well-being could look like to them. So I think it's something that needs to be, a part of any well-being strategy, and really helping to create the environment and culture that allows these groups to be successful, to have opportunities to pay the ERG leaders, and to really get great resources and structures in place to really start to see that ROI happen within the organization.
Great, thanks, Alysha. And this next question is for all of you. So the idea of an employee well-being strategy is to improve and positively contribute to the overall health of employees. But of course, employers have specific goals as well, one being improved retention. How can HR or people teams accomplish the overall goal of employee well-being strategies and goals such as the improved retention that they want to see? So let's say, Hannah, if you want to start with that.
Sure. So as we've been alluding to all along, well-being isn't just like staff picnics or pizza parties or like meditation Mondays, or just sort of these one-off initiatives that might make people feel good in the moment. It's really about our full well-being, all of the aspects. Like in positive psychology, there's the model of PERMA-V, which is made up of positive emotions. So what we think of as joy, what makes us feel good. Emotion or engagement, which is like flow, being in the zone, when you're really working on a project you're excited about. Relationships, the connection we have with other people. Meaning, doing things that we care about. Achievement, really accomplishing things, getting them across the finish line. And vitality, like that we do this in bodies. And so being cognizant of that and supporting our physical health as well. So there's that, and you can add in the equity pieces too. And it's, I think that it's interesting to think about separating someone's well-being from retention. Like retention is all about like, why would someone want to stay there? and why would they want to stay there is because it's good for their lives, for all of these different kinds of aspects we can think about. So that could get into pay. Pay is really important. Pay is, the ability to afford your life. And there's the benefits, there's access to time away and flexibility and, maybe floating vacation days, maybe unlimited vacation days, maybe 4 days a week. There's a lot of exciting things out there about giving people more control over their time. And then there's all the aspects of cultivating sort of joy and growth and access to opportunity. And really, I see well-being and retention as completely intertwined. And why you're making your case for why they would want to stay there, why what you have to offer them. Job searching isn't fun. So you've got that going for you, but you can, you're making a holistic case for why they should stick around and what you have to offer them.
Thanks, Hannah. And Alysha, you want to add on?
Yeah, I really loved everything that Hannah said. I think what's so key is to understand how strong this relationship is with well-being and retention. And I love how Hannah shared that it goes to why I want to stay at a company. If I feel supported, if I feel like I have, opportunity, whether it's in my career, whether it's in my job and going deeper, whether it's opportunity to create my own community and to relate to those who I work with and create impact, that's all meaningful to me. And we all as employees have those different definitions of what impact and meaningfulness look like to us. So if we're able to then layer on that element of well-being and understanding that how I'm able to be taken care of from a well-being perspective, again, whether mentally, physically, or just from being able to come authentically with my team, that all impacts everything else that I do. So if I find an organization that honors that and respects that and is able to create those opportunities where I'm able to put my well-being first, that's an organization I'm going to stick with. Because when we think about that type of culture, it all starts from the top. That means the leadership understands and appreciates this. My manager understands and appreciates this. I'm, and able to empower my team to understand flexibility and wellness options and really engage in a culture that allows them to put themselves first from that perspective and be able to have conversation and connection in relation to what well-being means. So it really then becomes a culture through and through. And if we're able to really create that type of opportunity and create that environment, then more people are going to want to stay and not just want to stay, but they're going to want to continue to give their best, be engaged, and really contribute back to the organization. So it goes in so many deep and different facets of how that allows an organization to be driven, to be high performing, to be optimized, because you're not losing your key talent. You're continuing to grow and nurture an incredible culture. You're attracting, even better talent or, strong talent out in the market as well. And you're continuing to just create an incredible ecosystem of individuals and people that are all now, aligned and driven to one mission. So it's really, really special when you start to, again, look at the layers of how this key element of well-being and employee engagement and retention all kind of go hand in hand.
Thanks so much, Alysha. And Robyn, can you share your thoughts as well?
Sure. I mean, look, Alysha and Hannah did a beautiful job, walking our attendees through that. I mean, well-being strategy is a retention strategy, right? They're not separate. They dovetail. And, thinking about retention as one half of the circle of your, attraction and then retention, and those things dovetail and are really two halves of the whole. So making sure that your employees feel supported, feel invested in, feel that trust, feel that, sense of well-being is critical to retention. Interestingly, Hannah was talking about ERGs and compensating. I have heard of companies that are compensating ERG members for their time with time off. So think about the intersection there of well-being and ERGs and DEI, and that understanding that people that are giving that extra unpaid time need time to recharge. And so instead of, perhaps giving them money, they're giving them that time that is of course paid, that time off, that extra time with their families to recharge. So again, all part and parcel, and well-being is a strategy for retention, just, plain and simple.
Thanks so much, Robyn. And actually, the next question is for you, Robyn. So once employee well-being strategies are put in place, there's still so much to do to see its effectiveness. Part of that falls under effective leadership and communication, which you have a lot of experience in. So tell us about the role leaders and managers play within employee well-being and efforts to improve retention.
Yeah, I think Alysha alluded to this a bit in her last answer, but modeling and setting the tone for culture comes largely from the top, from managers, and certainly employees. Their day-to-day experience is with that frontline manager. We do a ton of cultural assessment work. We have a proprietary data tool that we use, and the data shows that the most positive relationships are generally between an employee and their team and their immediate manager. And then those feelings start to wane as you get out into the organization. So it's really, really important for leadership to cascade down, and for managers and leaders, to demonstrate and model that well-being, that culture, that all the things that we're talking about are important. If you want to have a culture of well-being and your manager, is working 80 hours a week and never leaves their desk, there's an expectation as an employee that you should be doing that too. So there's a modeling aspect to this where we've got to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk of what we're saying and the culture that we're trying to create. So I think that's important, and I think part of that too is also, leadership and manager authenticity and vulnerability. The ability of those people to say, hey, you know what? I'm taking the day off. I am burnt out. I need to do X, or I've got a family commitment, or another thing that I need to do, or something that adds value to who I am as a human, not just who I am as a worker. And I'm going to do that. So that showing that it's okay is really, really important. And of course, you asked about communication. Communication sits on top of everything that we're talking about. Communication is critical. Making sure people know what's going on, that they feel involved in what's going on, that they have a voice, that they've got input into what's happening in the workplace is really, really important. And of course, leaders and managers, hold the key to communication. Toxic workplaces can be created just when people hold information hostage and don't share it. So communication is paramount to getting, this culture that we're looking for, where people do feel safe, where people can take the day, where people can express like, hey, I need a minute as a person. And having that vulnerability and authenticity and modeling and communication from leaders is the key to that.
Thanks, Robyn. And before moving on to the next question, Hannah or Alysha, is there anything you want to say?
Just to echo what Robyn had shared about that expectation. If your leader or manager is working those 80-hour weeks, you're implicitly going to feel that you have to do the same. And that is so powerful. And so if anyone that's a people leader listening to this, and you start to see those habits, talk to your employees, let them know that that's not what I expect of you. That is not the regular working schedule we want to have as a team, and speak and be vocal about it. And then also continue to lead by example and try not to fall into those habits.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. Great. All right. So moving on for Hannah. You've worked on retention with a wide range of companies and organizations and incorporated a lot of different types of expertise. Where can HR staff turn to find ideas on staff well-being?
So one thing I love about working on culture and well-being is that there's not like one book or one course or one manual where the answers to culture are. It's such a rich topic. It's so stimulating. You can turn to so many different communities, and I've had the pleasure to work with lots of different, with the LGBTQ community, with communities of color, with Native communities, with communities with disability and faith. It's just so rich to turn to lots of different communities to history to like community organizing to business models. And I love talking to people about all this stuff. I've done over 300 informational interviews because for some reason, and I've talked to so many different people in this space, and you know, whether you're talking to a librarian who's really interested in how to identifying needs and then developing resources, or you're talking to someone from the military who's really interested in the leadership aspect, or you're talking to someone, a clown turned leadership coach and chief learning officer who's really interested in the humor in like that kind of fun at work. And I just think it's such a rich space, and there's so many places to turn to. So it's that's something that keeps me engaged and excited and continuing learning, that there's not, you're never at a point where you're done, that you know all of it, or that you've discovered the one silver bullet. And with each organization you work with, or each team, you know, you're connecting with those individuals, those people, and what's important to them, what's exciting to them, what, you know, where they come from, and what, so I think it's just, that's something that's so meaningful, and especially for people who get into this field because they care about people and the people aspect of work. I think it's just such a rich space, and as there's more interest and resources going to this, I think we can really run with it.
Thanks so much, Hannah. And moving on to our next question, or our last group question for Alysha. You understand the importance of not just qualitative data, but also quantitative. What metrics should organizations or HR teams be measuring to ensure their employee well-being efforts are contributing to their retention goals?
That's a great question. I know usually engagement surveys are a big pillar as part of the HR kind of employee life cycle. So knowing that that's kind of like a key element where we get a lot of data, maybe once, maybe twice a year, it's important that we understand and incorporate questions that align back to our wellness strategy, and that align back to, therefore, retention. So looking at kind of key statistics regarding what demographics are currently more engaged than others, different tenured employees, understanding maybe what departments or what areas of the business are kind of seeing better retention or more fluid retention versus others, can help to give some really good insight. So I think that's really key. And then I think to layer on what you just shared about programs, it's really understanding kind of what are the key elements that are aligning to these stronger retention programs. So for example, if we a year ago created a new framework, or enabled maybe skip levels within the organization to understand and get other leaders more visibility, how is that now impacting how people connect to our leadership, how they connect back to their manager, and then the overall strategic kind of direction of the organization. And the way that we'll see that kind of in the data is, one, the engagement rate, two, how employees are feeling in regards to connecting with their peers and to their work, and three, what their future looks like and kind of the key plans they have for themselves as part of the organization and the workplace. So I think bringing all those relationships together and understanding how they, again, all tie in, they're all very tightly intertwined, really helps us to really understand how our programs are really contributing and really connecting back to our retention strategies. And to piggy on what Hannah had shared, there is no one size fits all. You may have to try different programs, different initiatives, get outside of the box, ask your employees what they want to see, test things out, do some labs or some experiments, and start to see what is going to resonate best with your team. And then taking from those learnings and creating a really special and unique workplace culture where retention, engagement, well-being, again, is at the core of what you're trying to achieve, and really connects with everybody at some level or at every role.
Kylie, if I could just jump into what Alysha's saying, she's spot on. And the fact that, every corporate culture, every enterprise culture is different. And you've got to be able to understand each individual culture. One size does not fit all. And what's going to work, at company A may not work at company B, or may need to be, morphed. And that's why the use of data is so, so important. And engagement surveys are great. I've often found that engagement surveys don't always get underneath the cultural issues, which is why we created like a cultural assessment, because it's looking at trust, psychological safety, belonging, inclusion, equity, all of those things, and and then cutting it by demographic to understand the different experiences, because that's another level of understanding that needs to happen. And then to Alysha's point, you've got that data that you can then use to inform your strategy, to set your KPIs, to be able to measure success along the way and see what's working and what's not working. So it doesn't prevent the agility. It gives you that place to start. So you've got that point A. You can, think about the future state. What do I want it to look like? What is point B? And how do I get there? And where you start and the strategy you devise may very well need to be revisited. There may be pieces that work and pieces that don't work, but they're always rooted in the data, which comes from employees. So you are you're marrying what your employees say with what you're doing, which also builds trust and inclusion and all of those things, and then gives you the ability to measure success. So the question you asked is very, very important. We start every client engagement with an assessment, or if they have something, we don't reinvent the wheel. We look at, analyzing what they have, but you've got to start with the data, or you're just sort of throwing things up and hoping something sticks.
Definitely. Thanks for adding that on, Robyn. That's really interesting. And Alysha, thanks for your answer. Hannah, anything you want to add on?
No.
Okay, great. So on to the question before we head over to the Q&A. So this is for all of you. I first wanted to say thank you for being here and sharing all of your insight. It was even more than I thought it was going to be, and very informative. And so anyway, we've heard all about the Great Resignation, and as employee well-being becomes more of a priority, as it should, we might start to see a shift toward the great retention, hopefully. Is there anything you want to add about employee well-being that may help teams or employers move in that right direction?
I can kick us off. I think what employers kind of need to understand is that well-being is a top of mind for a lot of employees right now. Again, we are still in the midst of a pandemic that has affected us in a lot of different ways, and that in and of itself is really key to understand. So when you're approaching strategy regarding wellness, look to your employees, look to understand what the inequities are, how to create a culture that makes it easier to talk about these topics, and to provide resources that are as easily accessible as possible. And I would say when you focus on having the key core culture on wellness and well-being, the rest are the benefits of it: higher retention, higher engagement, more collaboration and connection, and all those kind of key things that we've been talking about. So kind of go back to basics a little bit, understand where people are at, the level of burnout, the level of exhaustion, understand what that means in terms of your organization and your business, your KPIs and your goals, and then creating and realigning to a strategy that allows your employees to have a little bit of a breath to then come back, re-energize and refuel in order to give their best.
Thanks, Alysha. And Hannah, what would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd suggest looking at if there's problems you can identify, look to fix those, and also look at what's possible to build. So not just from a sort of deficit mindset of how can we like plug the holes, but how can we build a place that people want to be, that people can enjoy, that they can connect with one another, that there's growth opportunities, that they can have a good time at work, that they can be treated with dignity, that they can be connecting to things that matter to them and working on things that are important. There's so many ways to get into this. And as Robyn and Alysha were getting into, you want to listen to the employees and work to really surface those ideas the best you can, especially listen to folks at the margins, not just like the C-suite, what did I hear today that someone felt comfortable telling me, not just saying I have an open door policy, but does someone know what you're like, are they really just allowed to walk into your office at any day, or are there certain times or certain ways that are appropriate? So really trying to listen to their needs, because well-being isn't going to mean the exact same thing for everyone. Someone's going to want, and really thinking beyond like just waffle parties. I know some people love waffle parties. I know someone who could be like paid in waffle parties, but really thinking to what all of the elements of someone's well-being, so that you can retain people and also treat them well while they're in your charge.
Thanks, Hannah. And Robyn?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so telling that we're actually having this, panel discussion about this today, which is something that we may not have done, pre-pandemic and earlier. So I think that's very telling about, where we are in workplace culture, that we're having this conversation. And I think this is, organizations need to understand that they're investing in the whole person, all aspects of the person, and that culture has an impact, whether you're in a company of 8, or 18 or 80 or 800 or 8,000 or 800,000. Culture matters no matter where you are and the size of your organization. And I think recognizing that people matter, culture matters, and that investment in the whole person. So, you can bring your full self, your best self. When you're able to do that, you are impacting not just, your performance, talent performance, but the performance of the enterprise. And that's what needs to happen to get underneath some of these issues and really elevate them to making change in companies. So thrilled that we were able to have this and that people took the time to participate, because it's an incredibly important topic, both for people and for companies.
Thank you all for being here and sharing your insight. It was really, really helpful and informative. And we had a lot of people mentioning in the chat from LinkedIn saying that they're getting a lot from this, and I completely agree. And so I wanted to welcome anyone who's watching to send in your questions. It can be a more general question or a specific question for any of our panelists. A few questions we have already that I want to share. They're more general, so not for any of you in particular. So whoever wants to answer, feel free. So first question is, if employees aren't seeing any employee well-being initiatives or aren't seeing much change, how can they try to impact change, or maybe speak with their employer to really see that shift in employee well-being focus? If they're not seeing it happening from the employer side. So do any of you want to add to that or answer that?
I can kick us off. I'd definitely raise it, but bring a plan, bring some type of thought or idea behind what you want to do. I think with the employer and employee relationship, we have to understand that, if our employer isn't meeting a need or isn't starting to take it, an opportunity to its full length, bring ideas to the table, begin that dialogue. What are your other friends or other colleagues doing in other organizations that you could see work where you're at as well? So don't be afraid to engage in that conversation, start to initiate some key topics, plans, projects, whatever that might look like. And then further, let them know how you need them to support, what that looks like, getting their buy-in, making sure that it's something that, doesn't just live in that one conversation, but really starts to stem and really have legs and arms in other areas of the organization as well for other employees to benefit.
I think part of that plan too is to build your business case. I think oftentimes, leaders at enterprises may not fully understand the impact of not having something like this. So really start to build the business case. And I think those best practices and what others are doing is a way to do that, as well as any, research that you can bear around the connection between these kinds of programs and retention and the business impact of that. That's always the sort of trajectory that makes a leadership team sort of spin their head. They want to understand what impact this is going to have. So if you can bring that well thought out, well planned, sort of well researched body of knowledge to them, as well as what others are doing, because every company wants to know, what is everybody else doing, right? What's the competition doing? What's going on in the marketplace? So being able to bring that information, so come prepared and come with a plan. And I agree with Alysha. Building that business case is how you're going to get somebody's attention as an employee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Being clear that it's more than a nice to have, and that I imagine for success, it could be helpful to think through and what's an appropriate way to follow up, or what's, when could I expect to hear back, just so you're not getting frustrated if it's a back burner to other things, setting that from the start about what's a good way to follow up about this, or to, is there more materials you need, so that you can not be sitting and waiting and frustrated and wondering what's appropriate after your first contact.
Great. So it looks like we have some questions rolling in. Well, first, we just have more of a statement, which I think is really interesting, and kind of talks about what you guys mentioned earlier. So it says, many times I found management asking, why did so-and-so leave, but fail to ask what the company is doing to make the same so-and-so stick around. And I so agree. I think that's so interesting. And I think that's something that we hear a lot, people saying, why are you leaving the company? Or what tempted you to leave? Or, why are you looking for other opportunities? And I think it's so interesting. Do any of you want to expand on this a little bit more? Or maybe if you can say, are you seeing this shift in this question, instead of saying, why are they leaving? What can we do to stick around? Do you think that's happening?
Mm-hmm.
Is that shift happening?
Hannah, do you want to jump in?
Oh yeah, we were both looking at each other.
Yeah,
I think I love that shift and that reframe. That's really about earning the keep of the staff, instead of just waiting and seeing what happens, and is something better going to come along, or where they would have a better option. So folks may have heard of stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews. Yep. So that's a good way to directly have that conversation. And, some of these questions, if you think about asking what's your level of stress, or what could we take off your plate, or some of these questions that might feel like a dream for a employer or for your manager to be asking you, are really appropriate and important questions to be exploring with your staff, with your team, so then you're not as surprised in those situations, or you can understand, and instead of guessing, or it's working in tandem with them to understand their needs and help them and give them a better experience. And it might not be how things are set up at the moment, or how we originally configured of what work is, but that's possible, and that's available to us. And that those kinds of simple questions and check-ins, whether it's an official stay interview or in your regular check-ins with your employees, that you can be exploring some of those questions and really understanding where they're at and what they need. I think those shifts will be really valuable for everyone.
Yeah, I think you can also, if you wanted to almost pulse survey your people around retention, there are ways that, to ask around assessing risk around retention and around well-being and burnout. We often will have, asking employees around, their experience, and are they thinking of leaving, and when it's anonymous, or are you burned out? When those things are anonymous, you get a pulse. You may not know exactly who, but you get a sense, if you've got pretty high percentages, coming back, that you've got a cultural issue that you have to address. So that's one other way to sort of think about specifically asking, because oftentimes, in exit interviews, people don't feel safe enough to be honest about why they're leaving. So some of these anonymous sort of ways to take the pulse of the culture, sentiment of employees around these issues is important. But, I agree with Hannah. I was going to say the same thing. Stay interviews you're getting to people while they're there, because again, when they're leaving and they're out the door, they may not feel comfortable sharing. So I think that's a great mechanism, and sort of pulsing people on those specific issues and framing those questions in a way that gives you a sense of what's going on and addressing your risk, is a great way to sort of feel what's happening before it happens.
Thanks so much. Alysha, anything you want to say?
I echo what Robyn and Hannah has shared, and I think two leaders need to have this conversation more often and to be in the mix of it. Because it's always, a little bit too late when the person's got one foot out the door. So start to think about those retention issues, whether it's roles, salary, responsibilities, scope of work. There's different ways we can engage and, retain talent more than just, a salary figure. So really understanding the motivations of the individual and tapping into that in order to align to an engagement strategy.
Thanks, Alysha. And another question we have, I'll show it here. Many times organizations roll out employee satisfaction surveys to gauge employee well-being. How do we ensure that these surveys are in sync with employee retention?
So, that's a data analysis question. I think, first of all, are you keeping data and analytics around employee retention? So you've got to have something to compare what you're getting from that survey with retention to be able to either, challenge or validate with the connection there. So that's the first thing, are you keeping that data? And then if the data is misaligned and sort of you see a lot of people leaving, but everybody there saying, oh, no, it's great. You may have an issue with people feeling trusting or safe enough. Even if they're filling out an anonymous survey, they may feel that they could be identified. And, are they being truthful and honest in what's going on? I would say that retention is probably a better measure in that instance of, intent of what's happening in your culture. I think that you've got to see the congruence or misalignment there and try to figure out what's going on if those data points are not, not lining up.
Thanks,
I don't know
Robyn.
if anybody has any other thoughts on that, but I would really got to dig deep in there to understand what's going on and get underneath that data.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And moving on to, I believe, our last question. How do call center-based companies with mostly remote employees increase engagement? Very often the priority in such environments is having agents logged into the phone and answering calls. But what can be done to make them feel part of their team, I think? Let me see. It cut off. Yeah, part of their team.
I think what's key here is kind of understanding it goes beyond the work, right? We have to see people as whole humans, not just work, logging in, logging out. Yes, at the end of the day, a job needs to be done, but what are the ways that we're engaging with that person beyond what they do from their hours of work? And how are we providing opportunities for them to connect, collaborate, and really be with their peers, be with their manager or leadership, and really contribute to the overarching culture? So yes, it can start from a program perspective, whether it's social hour or, doing things online and having, events or bringing people together, whether it's your ERGs, but you have to create a culture of how we begin connection and not just make it one-off instances like we've been talking about. So making sure that we can all do that effectively is going to help in more of those call center environments, because then we're providing opportunity for that connection to happen authentically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've seen lots of creative ways to connect virtually throughout COVID, and maybe providing options. Maybe there's someone who would like a improv style get together of ridiculous call situations, or maybe there's other kinds of ways people would want to connect informally for a virtual coffee time, or games, or chances to share about themselves and get to know one another better. So I think maybe getting a sense from them about what feels like a valuable, interesting, exciting use of their time or way to connect with their colleagues, and maybe having options, because it probably there would be a variety that folks might like.
It's definitely time to be creative in that kind of situation. But I think anything you can think of that builds connection and builds relationship and gives people the opportunity to really get to know each other on a different level understand the other person, get to know the other person. Just the human pieces of what we do to interact, I think, is beneficial. And you can find creative and different ways to build those programs in. Great question. It's a tough one.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much for answering those questions. And if anyone who's watching wants to connect with any of our panelists, you'll be able to find them on the event information page. So feel free to connect with them. And if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm sure they would be happy to answer. And thank you so much for watching. And thank you all, Hannah, Robyn, and Alysha, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thank you.